We're going to be talking about your team, and just as a big caveat, this is going to be such a long video. The number of pages I've typed out, it's been like 15 pages, but it's really important to go over these things. I wanted to try to split it up in a way that made sense, but because there's a lot of overlap between and among talking about whether you go solo, whether you get co-founders, whether you go solo with basically vendors and or employees, whether you have true organic co-founders or not, there's so much overlap. There wasn't any real way that I could split that up without each video being super, super repetitive. So I'm putting in one video. If you want me to break it up, then let me know and I'll make like a completely separate course on the team and I will do my very best to break it all up. So, anyhow, but you're here at the team video. And so by this time, congratulations, you validated your product using the methods that we have talked about in the last few videos. So now comes the real fun, and that's figuring out who in the world is crazy enough to join you. Now, maybe you already have people who are crazy enough to join you. They've already been on this ride with you, and that's awesome. But maybe you don't. So I'm going to be talking about these issues fluidly. There are a lot of factors to consider when you think about whether you want to go alone, whether we want to bring on any co-founders, the timing of that, and whether you bring on employees. So we're going to talk about the solo founder plus advisory board situation, a founder plus 1 to 3 co-founders. By the way, if you are a founder plus a certain number of co-founders, 3 is the absolute max that usually can be tolerated by investors. Usually they want to see 1 or 2 co-founders plus an original founder. We're going to talk about just very briefly a true organic co-founder situation. Solo founders plus employees, that means that you don't have any co-founders, it's just you. But if you want to bring on some employees because they aren't qualified to be co-founders, that could really work, even if you are bringing the employees on for equity. This has its pros and cons. We're going to talk about all of that. Okay, so another caveat, whether you go down your startup route solo or with a co-founder or different co-founders, just understand different investors will have different opinions. All of them think that they are right. So importantly, do not make the decision to bring on co-founders or to go solo based upon what any one single investor says, what any single accelerator says. Instead, you need to consider all of these factors and you need to contemplate them, like let them sit in your noodle for a while. And then you need to do what's right for your business, whether that's getting co-founders or whether that's going solo. I'll talk about Y Combinator a little bit because they give very, very pointed advice about co-founders. And, it may or may not be right for your business. You have to think about that. When appropriate, I will give you examples from my own experience, as well as situations that I've seen founder friends get into. And the reason why I'm doing this is not to be negative for the sake of being negative. I never really care about being negative for the sake of being negative, ever. I'm telling you these things just to help you avoid the pitfalls, okay? So if if I'm telling you a story to help you avoid pain, then inherently that story is going to be a negative story. So just kind of understand that's the whole reason why I'm doing it. I used to work for this guy. He was a real jerk, but he had a good point, and that was um, learn off of someone else's skin. He was Italian. So learn off of someone else's skin, meaning if somebody else touches their hand to a stove and burns himself, you can learn by watching them and not touch the stove yourself. So that's the whole point of this entire course. Actually, this entire roadmap is for that. Okay, so if you need to take breaks while you're watching the video, speed it up, watch this video many times over if you need to. Let this one really, really sink in because I really think that the team factor is probably the single most important thing that you're going to deal with in a startup. That's my own experience. And I know that investors really do take a good look at the team. So let's go ahead and get started on the substance. Let's first talk about you being a solo founder. So if you alone were able to build your prototype that we talked about in the last several videos, then great. Super impressive. Congrats. You probably don't need co-founders. And you probably just need a manufacturer for scale. If you're talking about CPG, um, if you have some technical capability and you're building something that is technical and not a widget, then you may just very well need to hire more nerds. If you have tech knowledge where you're going to be able to lead a team like that and really speak their language, so you have coding experience, really high level stuff, then that's fantastic. You may very well not need co-founders. You probably just need, an agency, or you need to just find some freelancers, or maybe you can afford, if you have some pocket money, you can afford to build a small team. By the way, I might accidentally slip up and say coworkers when I mean co-founders. I've caught myself doing that a couple of times. It's really annoying. I hope I don't do that, but that's just a little warning. So you don't necessarily need a lawyer at this point when you're flying solo, but it can be really helpful. I think that if there were any point where I'd say, okay, when is it a good time to bring on a lawyer? It's either here, if again, we're just talking about you being a solo founder, or it's like right as you're about ready to raise a family, friends and family round, something like that. So it's going to be really close to this stage. So you may as well start looking for a good attorney. And I think it's good to interview some attorneys. So anyhow, there are a couple of underpinning issues here that can help you know when you want to file with the state, when you want to get a bank account, when you want to retain an attorney. So these are boring issues. But I often say that it's the boring stuff that moves the needle. You have to know about this stuff. If you are a founder and you don't want to bother learning about this stuff, you are not going to be successful. You're going to fall straight on your face because you have to know this stuff. You must. You put yourself in a super liable situation if you don't do these things correctly. So a bank account and EIN. EIN, if I remember right, it's employee identification number. Basically, it's a tax ID number. So you have to file with the state and then they give you your EIN. So, yeah, so that's what you do. Okay. One question that you have to ask yourself as to whether this is the right time to start getting a bank account and all that is, are you paying for manufacturing, or are you building your tech, or whatever it is that you're building? Are you doing it with your own funds? If so, then you don't necessarily need a separate bank account yet, because you can just pay for it out of your own personal bank account. But I think it's a good idea to get a business account. If you don't open a separate business account, then you risk blending your personal finances with your business finances too much, and this can leave you open to personal liability. So that means that if you put something out there into the world, and let's say somebody gets sick, or they something happens to where they want to sue you. Now, normally, if you keep everything separate, depending on how you're filing, you can have protection. And that means that, yeah, that person can sue the company, but they can't go after your own personal assets. So if you own a house, for example, the person suing you would not be able to go after your house if you keep everything separate. And again, it depends on how you file too. So, and every state is different. So I don't want to get too into that. You can always talk to an attorney about that. I am an attorney, but hell, I hired my own attorney for that because I don't do corporate law. But just want to let you know, it might be a good idea to go ahead and open a separate business account if you're already paying for stuff for your business. Now, you can always take money and transfer it out of your personal account and put it into the business account, and then you pay for business stuff out of the business account. I mean, I've done that tons, and there's really nothing wrong with that. But you want to keep track of the money that you're putting into that account from your own personal funds, because eventually, and I don't have this in there, but you can pay yourself back. It can be construed as a loan, and there's paperwork for that too. So since I don't have that in here, you maybe just write yourself like a little note about that. But make sure that you are keeping track of what's going into the account, the source of those funds, so you know whether to count it as revenue or not. This is all going to be important for taxes and everything. You can get a bookkeeper to help you deal with this. I do recommend that if you get a bookkeeper, that you do not go with an expensive one, goodness gracious. And I don't think you need a bookkeeper for a while. You really, really don't. So don't spend the money on a big expensive bookkeeper. Just try to keep track of things in an Excel spreadsheet and do your best. Do your best to not spend all of your money on all these expensive people and tools. Okay, so if you are not paying for the manufacturing or building your tech or whatever with your own funds, then who's paying? Whose funds are you paying with? If you are paying for things with anything other than your own funds, then do the safe thing and open a bank account. All of those funds that are external, they should be going into a business bank account. Otherwise, you are super, 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 super liable depending on how that's done, it could be considered self-dealing. And you don't want to, even if you're using like a family member's funds and you're thinking, oh, my cousin will never sue me if I just put it in my own bank account and then pay for things to the business out of there. You want to bet? Um, I'm a lawyer. I've seen all kinds of things happen. I've seen family member turn on family member, sibling turn on sibling, parents turn on kids, kids turn on parents, grandparents turn on kids, and vice versa, neighbors, friends, best friends, you name it. I have seen it and I have read about it. And so I highly recommend, like, if you don't want to bother when you're paying from your own funds, oh, okay, but definitely if you're paying from somebody else's funds, even a small amount, time to open a bank account, but you cannot open a bank account until you have your paperwork filed. So you need to have your paperwork filed with the state, and you're going to need the EIN number. Now, I think if I remember right, I can't remember how I did this. I think you can just do stuff like a filing online in order to get your EIN number, but I'm not 100% certain about that. Anyhow, you want to check that out and just make sure that you have your EIN, and the bank is going to want to know which state you're filed with. Now, a lot of startups, if they plan on getting big investors in the future, they will go ahead and file a Delaware C Corp. This may or may not be right for you. Again, I do recommend that you go ahead and have a conversation with an attorney about this. So let's go ahead and talk about attorneys while we're at it. There are really two types of attorneys that you may be dealing with at this stage. And up here on A, I say corporate attorneys, and on B, I talk about intellectual property attorneys. So we're going to talk about each one of those things. I cannot stress enough how much you do not want to be hiring just a random attorney to do this stuff for you. I would never ever want anyone to hire me to do to do this stuff for them ever. It's not the thing that I do. Attorneys, they're similar to doctors in the sense that you don't go to a podiatrist, a foot doctor, and say, hey, what's wrong with my heart? You go to a cardiologist for that. You would never ever want to go to the wrong kind of doctor for the wrong kind of thing. You don't want to go to the wrong kind of lawyer for the wrong kind of thing. And people just think like, oh, you're an attorney, you know the law. Do you know how like vast the law is? It's it's so robust and huge and complex and confusing. And so that's why often you have attorneys that specialize. I think that if I see a single attorney on their website, they list all of these practice areas and it's like just like one or two of them. I often think they must not be very good at any of those things because you can only do so much very well. It's quite impossible to do all the things very well. So technically, you are like legally able to file these things yourself if you want to. You're allowed, but I think that I am conservative about this kind of stuff and I like to play it safe. So I did hire an attorney to do this for me, and we talked about my goals and everything. The attorney should be able to guide you about what kind of entity you should form and in which state or states. Sometimes you want to file in multiple states. It just depends on the situation. So ask your attorney about that. And if you're super confident that you can do all this yourself, okie dokie. But note that ChatGPT is not the end all be all on this front. So don't be thinking, oh, I can do this by myself because all I have to do is ChatGPT it. Really? Okay. I think that all of us or most of us know that ChatGPT does suffer from hallucinations, and they might, ChatGPT, I've said this in other videos, all LLMs, large language models, they are trained to do two things and two things only. They're trained to answer a question, like a good dog, you have answered my question. So sometimes they'll answer quickly, even though the answer isn't correct, because they want to do the good dog thing and answer a question. The second thing that it's trained to do is to predict the next token and to put that very, very, very simply in another way, to predict the next word. Those are the two things that it's trained to do. So that's why it's not necessarily the best thing to go to. Usually you will get C plus B minus answers from ChatGPT. And sometimes you can get better answers, that's true. But you would super hate for you to rely on ChatGPT and for it to give you some answers, but maybe not all the answers, and maybe you could like prompt it further and prompt it further and prompt it further. But do you really want to risk it? Because at least if an attorney gets it wrong, at least there's a malpractice issue. You can go after somebody for that. But with ChatGPT, who are you going to go after? Nobody. It all falls on you. So I highly recommend that you get an attorney and that you make sure it's somebody who is super well versed at startups in particular. So I will give you a big giant red flag because one question is how do you know that you have a good attorney, right? There are plenty of crappy attorneys out there. How do you know you have a good attorney? This is coming from my own past experience. If you ask an attorney which direction you should go when it comes to anything, any aspect of your startup, anything at all, and if they give you options, but they don't give you specific recommendations, that is a red flag. So let me give you an example. My first corporate attorney that I hired for my company to work, um, she was a nice enough gal, but when I wanted to start an employee incentive plan, and I'm going to go over that later on in this video, and it came to what kind of shares or stock options could be issued through that, she said, well, if you want to do it under this like code or regulation, you do this kind. And if you want to do it this way, you do this. And it's like, well, I don't know what the hell I want. I mean, I've done workers' compensation on both sides for the employers and insurance carriers, and I've also represented employees. So I have a lot of knowledge about employers and employees. I have a lot of that. And I've done juvenile dependency. I have not done corporate law. So, I know that when I am an attorney and I have a client, I lead them down the path. I say, here are your options, but here's my recommendation for your particular situation, and here's why I'm recommending it. That's what a good attorney does. And my first attorney didn't do that. She's just like, here are all your options. And she just like plopped it in front of me. And I didn't know which way to go. And she kept doing that over and over again. I fired her. I fired her. I ended up hiring a great attorney who's way more expensive, but at least like he's extremely direct and lets me know exactly how to go. So that's a huge red flag you want to watch out for when it comes to an attorney. And sometimes you won't know that until you get into it. But if you can try to vet that by having a conversation with them ahead of time, then just try, just do your best. Um, all right, let's talk about intellectual property attorneys or IP attorneys for short. IP attorneys have special training. They can help you protect trade secrets of your business. Now, by special training, I don't mean they took a course over a weekend and got special training. You cannot be, like legally, you cannot be an intellectual property attorney in the United States unless you have passed the patent bar. So not only do you have to pass the regular bar exam for whatever state you're in, you also have to pass the patent bar. And then to qualify to take the patent bar, you have to have an undergraduate degree in like a hard science. So like, biochemistry or it was what organic chemistry, whatever it is, like biology would count. There's a list, a finite, very short list of things that you could major in as an undergraduate in order to qualify to take the patent bar. And that's of course after you go to law school and do all that. So your uncle's best friend's neighbor, if they're just a regular old attorney, can't call themselves an IP attorney unless they've done all of that. So please just be careful. And this also should help you understand why it's not maybe the best idea for you to go at it alone. Like the fact that you have people with so much training and specialization having to do this, and they still have to appeal certain decisions by whoever's at the patent office rejecting your patent or whatever, they still have to, fight those things. They're in the trenches and they know how to do it. So if you want to go it alone, you are more than welcome to try, but just buyer beware. IP attorneys are extremely expensive, though. Very, very, very expensive. Just to even think about filing a patent, you're talking about $10,000 right off the bat. So whether you need to file now or whether you can wait till later, you can maybe think about waiting till later. It's up to you. So when we're talking about IP attorneys, we're talking about really three things: copyright, trademark, and patents. Okay. So let's talk about the difference among these very, very briefly. I will not get into it for a long time, but you just need to know what of yours could potentially be protected. So copyright is protecting creative expression, and you can think about like, books, music, painting, even code, even computer code. That counts. And by the way, code is different than like a mechanized process. So if you're building some sort of tech product, those two are different. Okay, they're separated out. But the code can be protected under copyright, certain blog posts, videos. If you made it and it's original, then copyright gives you the right to say who can copy, distribute, or adapt it. So, example, if you write the code for your app or if you record a podcast, the copyright is what prevents someone else from just duplicating it. Trademark protects brands and identifiers. So your name, your logo. And by the way, just note that your company name, even if you filed your company name under the state and the state's like, okay, no other company exists by that name, so you have the name, that doesn't mean that the trademark of that name is protected. No, that's a big mistake that people make. They think that they filed with the state, they operate their entity's name is Twerk Incorporated, and that doesn't mean that Twerk, the trademark, is protected. I had to file separately to get that protected. Your logos, your taglines, depending on the situation, sounds or colors. So that's, like Tiffany Blue, for example. So these things can be trademarked, um, and that can really protect you, but you can also go super overboard on the trademarks. You could think of any halfway cool tagline, and then if you change your mind and want to change the tagline down, in like a month or two, that's another whole bunch of money. It can get very expensive. So, for example, you can't launch a shoe brand with a swoosh and call it Nike with an E at the end, with an extra E at the end. That doesn't work. The trademark office will look into similar trademarks. And for example, Twerk, our logo, um, and I think also our name initially got rejected. And the freaking guy who was the one deciding these things, he said it was too close to work, WRK. Like, no, it's not. But you can't just appeal and say, no, it's not. There's this whole appeals process and it has to be done a particular way. So I had to pay my attorney extra money and it really sucked to fight that and appeal it. And we won on appeal. Oh, these things are very complex and they are very expensive, but depending on what you're building, it might be worth it. I did have a friend who she's a female founder, she's building tech, and she had the name of her company. She had a tagline, and some big person with a lot of money swooped in, was obviously copying everything that she was doing, stole the name, stole an almost identical tagline, and I mean, what could she do? It was done. And if they file the trademark first, it doesn't matter. You're kind of toast there. So just think about that. Your patents protect processes. Okay, inventions and processes. So for instance, with Twerk, I've got the code, but it's also if I can show kind of in process mapping form exactly how the process works for a user, or how each user communicates with one another on the back end, how the, AI communicates with one another, that these things can be patented. So it covers new, useful, non-obvious ideas for how something works. It can be a machine, a method, chemical compound, or even certain types of software. So for example, if you invent a new way for batteries to charge, like 10 times faster, then a patent can give you exclusive rights to use, sell, or license that method because it is a methodology. It is a process by which you figured out how to charge batteries 10 times faster. Okay, so having said all of this, now let's say you go ahead and you get all this protection and all of these things, and let's say somebody comes and copies you. What can you do? Well, you could file a lawsuit, but it might not be worth it because if it's against a big, huge, huge, huge brand, chances are they can afford these big attorneys who can delay things for you, and you're gonna be hosed. And so it'll be really hard to find um, an attorney to go after them because it would make you the plaintiff, and plaintiff attorneys operate on contingency fee, and that means it's a percentage of what they can win. And if they see that they're going to be working 20 years on this thing because the other attorneys can delay, it's going to be very hard to find an attorney who could do this. So the question is, well, why bother protecting yourself? It's a good question. And I guess it's so that one way is that you can move forward in your process. Otherwise, people just might steal and steal and steal and steal. And if they go ahead and file the things first, you're never going to be able to launch with any sort of branding, and that's kind of annoying. Next, you never know if you're going to make it big. Maybe you're going to make it big, and you can go after them, or at least send a cease and desist. There's nothing wrong with doing that. So there are lots of things to consider. It's not black and white, and this is all very expensive. It could protect you, however. Something to consider. All right, now, we're just now getting into co-founders. So if you need to take a break and pause the video, this would probably be a great time to do it. Whew. All right, let's shake it off. Let's go. Co-founders, do you need or want a co-founder? Let's be real about whether you need one to begin with. Some founders don't, okay? And it's completely fine if founders do not need a co-founder. I mean, if you can run as a solo founder and just hire for tech or manufacturing, then do it. I mean, if if it's as simple as that, then fantastic. Don't give away equity just to please imaginary investors who are going to say that, oh, you need a co-founder. Why don't you have a co-founder? Oh, I would have invested in you if you had a co-founder. You don't get a co-founder for that reason. I made that a big mistake there by trying to get co-founders right away because I thought I wouldn't get investment otherwise. And it was a really, really huge mistake. So yes, some investors will look sideways at solo founders, but others will actually prefer it. Others will say, well, that's a great thing that you didn't get co-founders because I like to see that you're smart enough to not just give away your equity for nothing, because if it's not necessary, why are you doing it? The flip can also happen. So you can get co-founders and be really praised for getting co-founders by or having co-founders by some investors or accelerators. And then others are going to say, well, why did you do this? You should have just remained solo. There's no pleasing everybody all the time. And because this is something where there is really a difference of opinion widely among investors and among accelerators, you really just do need to think about all these things and figure out what is best for your business. So, what makes a co-founder? How do you know whether somebody even qualifies as a co-founder? There are some characteristics that are absolutely crucial in co-founders. First of all, it's a matter of ownership, but it's not just ownership, it's operations. So, they need to be able to operationally do something functional that is big and important to your company. Not just because, you and your buddy like want to own a company. That doesn't work. They have to be full-time on the business. Now, if they have a full-time job already, great. Now you have the two full-time jobs. So, if they're not able to do that, or if they like their work-life balance, or they have a day job and they're just kind of using their weekends and nights, just doing whatever they want, I mean, that's fantastic. I mean, I just commend people who do that. And you know what? That's not a co-founder. That kind of person cannot be a co-founder. So I brought in my best friend when I very first started to work. I'm like, oh, you can be co-founder. And I thought, well, she's done some HR stuff and she'd be a great CPO. I made like all of these mistakes with my best friend, whom I love, and I'm still lucky that she loves me. And so she thought, she was going to be co-founder and all this stuff. And then it became very clear to me that she wasn't putting in like any time at all in the business, not like anything. There wasn't really much for her to do, to be fair, but also she didn't have, and I love her very much, but she didn't have like the C-suite leadership skills at all to do stuff on her own initiative, coming up with her own ideas. She needed to be very much led, and that is just not a co-founder. A co-founder needs to be able to lead some portion of the company. So they need to have complementary skills. So if you are great at, let's say, um, marketing, and then your co-founder is great at marketing, and neither one of you know how to build, then investors are going to wonder, well, why in the world are two people who are super great at marketing doing this when they don't have complementary skills? You're doing the same exact job, two people for one job, and you're breaking up equity for that. Why are you doing that? You could maybe explain that away, especially if what you're creating is a marketing firm. And you really do need two robust people who are very good at that. But chances are you have some complementary skills and your skills don't completely overlap. So, what you want to do is really lean in to the complementary skills so that each one of you can be strong in your own capacities and not completely overlapping. Um, Equity, not salary. Here's the key. Co-founders, they work full time and they take equity only, no salaries. If somebody wants a paycheck, they're an employee, they are not a co-founder. Um, Accelerators, they're going to test this too. A lot of them are going to require all founders slash co-founders to be on site to at the accelerator. So if your so-called co-founder can't commit, then they're out. Um, And that really speaks to whether they're full-time or not. But if they want a paycheck, then yeah, they need to be an employee. And you probably can't afford an employee at this point. You need a co-founder who's going to be willing to work on equity. And that means probably they have a day job, and that's okay. As long as they're working full-time, that's what matters. Um, Now, sometimes you or a co-founder could come to the table and say, well, I'm super valuable, and so I deserve to make this much money plus this percentage of the company. Um, I thought that naively when I was very first thinking about starting to work. I'm like, well, I was a managing attorney at a law firm and on my way to make, I won't say the amount, but a lot of money as like an operations partner at my old law firm. And that's not, you're not there right now. You're not there with the startup, and investors are not going to be willing to pay you for your prior expertise. They want you to eat ramen noodles and that's it. Um, I also had my first CTO tell me, well, at any other company I'd be making, and he threw out like $250,000. I'm like, yeah, that's an established company. We're a startup and you're a co-founder. And he didn't get it. He didn't get it. I ended up firing him. So he was not the right fit at all. But um, that's it's not the right attitude to have. And co-founders need to understand that they're here for equity. Maybe down the line they can make some money, but that's down the line. That is not while you're pre-product. That is not before you launch. That's not when you're pre-revenue. Okay. So co-founders also get signing rights on bank accounts and legal documents. Employees don't. So you need to really keep those lines super clean. And if you don't super trust your co-founders when it comes to this, don't take on co-founders. Don't. They have a right, and a bank will ask you when you're opening up a bank account, well, do you own the company, and are there any co-founders? And if you say they're co-founders, they have to be there to be signing stuff. Okay. Just because bring on co-founders if you're going to do that. Don't give away C-suite titles yet. You could always have people go up in title. It is almost impossible to go backward in title without demoralizing people. Like I mentioned, I had my best friend. I gave her a CPO, a Chief People Officer title, because she'd been in HR for like 15 years. And I thought, oh, this will be great. I could just give her this great big title. That was just such a huge, huge mistake. And I also thought because she was my best friend, because I always thought she was like super competent and all that, I thought that she could be a C-suite level kind of person. I have been at that level myself. I have run like a big law firm. Like I was a COO basically for my old law firm, and it had more than 300 employees. So super large law firms are way, way bigger than that, but that's still quite a bit. And I ran operations. So I just sort of assumed that she would kind of be on the same page as me. After all, we grew up together, and I was really, really wrong because when I got into it, I just learned she's just not at that level, like not even close. So um, it was a really bad situation to have that conversation with her. It was really awful. Also, my first CTO was totally not qualified. He had been a software engineer for 20 years, and I just sort of assumed, okay, well, you've been a software engineer for full stack for 20 years, and surely you know how to be a CTO. He had no idea what the hell he was doing at all, like not even a little bit. Um, yeah, it was a nightmare. So don't just give away C-suite titles to your co-founders. You can just be called founder, co-founder. That's fine. True organic co-founders. If you and a person or two truly came up with your idea for your startup together, and if you collectively want to work on this, don't be kicking them to the curb. You guys came up with this together, so you are all co-founders. Now, normally when we talk about a company, we're so used to hearing like this is the founder and these are the co-founders. But if you truly came up with it together, then you are all co-founders. There is no founder plus co-founder situation. You are all co-founders. That's perfectly fine and that's appropriate. Co-founder equity split. So whether you're, I mean, I refer to the above situation as like an organic co-founder situation, but you can call it whatever you want to. Just understand when I talk about that, that's what I'm saying. So whether your co-founders are organic or whether you found them after you had your big idea, once your prototype team is already in the trenches with you, then that is great. I mean, sometimes you have to go it alone even with the prototype, and you don't find your coworkers until well after the prototype was tested. But if you have a team with you during the prototype phase, that is really, really great. And at that point, you want to ask if they are in it for real with equity. Whenever you are ready to talk about equity, you want to get the terms in writing, no matter what. Nothing kills a founding team faster than vague promises and I thought we agreed arguments. Memories are not perfect. Your memory isn't perfect. Their memories are not going to be perfect. And you want to have something written down that you can point to that you both, at least agree to informally, an email chain, something that you can go back and point to and say, look, this is what we agreed on. Think of equity like a pizza. If you slice it up right away, then investors will show up later and wonder why there's nothing left for them. This can kill deals with investors. So when you first put together your paperwork and you file it with the state, you agree on a certain number of shares that are going to be issued. Okay, this is a big deal. You have to make sure that in the same instrument, you are not saying, okay, well, I will get 33% of all the shares. And then my two co-founders, they will also get 33% each of the shares because that means your whole pie is gone. And I'll show you what I mean a little bit later, but you you don't want to give away your entire pizza. There needs to be a slice left over for investors down the road. All right. And if you don't do that, the investors, they'll just be like, this person doesn't know what they're doing, and they're gonna pass. They won't even take you seriously once they see that that's happened. So lawyers are expensive, but at this point, if you're bringing on co-founders, you really do need one. And like I mentioned before, not your neighbor's DUI guy, a real startup attorney who knows equity cliffs and corporation documents, etc. Expect to pay thousands. And I mean, even though it is expensive, use that as a filter. If your co-founders, if they balk at splitting up the cost of attorneys, then they're probably not as serious as you are. You might want to reconsider whether they should bring them in as official co-founders. They might be able to be useful in some other way. But at this point, you should be either supporting the venture financially equally, or if they're not in a situation where they can do that, there needs to be some sort of plan for them to buy in or whatever. Something has to happen to where at some point you guys are equal out in whatever you're putting into the venture, or at least equal relative to the percentage of shares that you're getting. All right. Remember though, when you are finding a lawyer for your startup, the lawyer represents the company, not you. And that means that there can be conflicts. If you and your co-founders end up in a conflict, it happens an awful, awful lot. You hear about it all the time. Then the lawyer, I mean, there's a potential conflict of interest there. And if you actually do have a conflict, there's a real conflict of interest. And then the lawyer has to do what is best for the company and isn't going to necessarily have your back if having your back is not what's best for the company. So understand that it doesn't even matter if you're the one paying the lawyer. Just because if you're the only one paying the lawyer, it doesn't mean the lawyer represents you. The lawyer represents the client, and in this case, the client is the company. I mentioned beforehand, at this point, you definitely would need an EIN in order to set up a bank account because your co-founders and you would be putting together your pool of cash and you'd be putting it in that separate business bank account in order to be able to pay the lawyer from that bank account. So yeah, it's not a bank account isn't essential necessarily right away, but if you are pulling cash for legal fees, then yes, you need to do that. And I do think that the moment you get co-founders, you've got to get on board with all this stuff. A little bit of a break in our programming here. I realized that I had to refilm this entire portion of this video because I kept accidentally saying issued instead of authorized. I didn't want to confuse you all. So you are actually watching take two of this portion of the video, and then I'll get back to the original when I move on from this particular subject. So let's talk about equity. If you want to start with co-founders, then you need to understand the pie. So I sort of talk about equity like it's a pie. You want to make sure there's enough equity left for investors to be able to take some of that pie. And here's what I want you to know about vocabulary, because one particular part of the vocabulary is confusing to a lot of newbies. So there are four terms that you should know when it comes to equity, at least as a 101. Authorized share, that means the whole pie, all of the possible shares, not issued shares, not shares that have already been allocated to certain people or to certain groups, but all the possible shares that exist in your entity. Those are called authorized shares. And what happens when you first submit your paperwork to the state, you have to indicate in that paperwork how many shares are being authorized, and you alone can't do it. If you have co-founder, like the whole the like board has to do it. So it just depends on if you have a board, if you alone consist of your board or if other people consist of your board, but you have to authorize shares. Typically, the number of shares that are authorized at the outset of formation of a company is 10 million. That is what is expected, and nobody's going to bat an eye if they see that. So I think about, like, let's talk about an actual pie. And let's say you've baked a pie, you're in the kitchen, you've baked a pie, and you cut it into 100 slices. It's a really big pie. And let's say you have people out in the dining room and they're waiting to be served. And let's say those people are your co-founders and or, any sort of like employee who would get shares. I should probably just say co-founders because employees, they get options and they have to exercise those. And I don't want to like screw that up. I'll talk about that in a second. So let's just say it's you and your co-founders are out in the dining room. You can bring out 60 slices for you and your co-founders to have. Those are called issued shares. That means if they're in front of you, they're not available for other people. All right. The stuff that's still left in the kitchen, those are unauthorized. Okay, they're sorry, they're not unauthorized. See, that's how I kept saying authorized versus issues. They're unissued. They are unissued. They're authorized because they're available in the kitchen, but they're unissued because they still remain in the kitchen. They're not out in the table, on the table for other people to eat. So outstanding, and this is the confusing part for a lot of people. And this actually was not where I messed up in the video. The mess up in the video that I did before was that I kept saying issued versus authorized, and they're totally different. Outstanding shares are issued shares. So you've put the 60 slices of pizza in front of you all at the dining room table, and let's say you're only going to eat like 50 of those slices. Now, usually when it comes to issued shares, those are all being exercised by the co-founders at the same time of formation. All of that gets taken care of and wrapped up at the same time. So usually issued shares are the same as outstanding shares when it comes to co-founders. But in the future, if you are issuing stock options to employees, then they can exercise those options or not. If they if they want to exercise those options, then those issued shares become outstanding also. However, if they're taking a while to exercise the options, let's say they're fully vested, and I'll go over vesting in just a little bit, then those are issued shares, meaning they're not readily available for other people, but they haven't exercised them yet. So if they fail to exercise the stock options, basically convert them into shares within the period of time that's set out by the company, then those issued shares go back into the unissued pool, or they go back into an employee incentive plan. So, or you have it's called either an employee incentive plan or an equity incentive plan. They're interchangeable, and either way, it means that you've reserved a portion. This slice of the pie that's like unissued, you have reserved a portion for future employees, current or future employees, to be able to enjoy some equity. Okay, so authorized is the whole pie. Issued means they're not available for future investors. You're taking them away from future people, and you are allocating them to certain people. Unissued are the slices that are still left in the kitchen, so investors will be able to at least know that they have something in the kitchen. And then outstanding shares are the shares that have been exercised. Often when you're talking about co-founders, issued and outstanding, they don't mean the same thing, but they tend to equal the same number of shares. So I hope that this makes sense. And there are plenty of resources about this, but I really tried to make it as simple as possible. So I'm gonna keep going and give you some examples, and hopefully that can help clarify some things. So let's pretend that you have three co-founders, meaning total. So there are three of you in total, and you each have an equal stake in the company. You don't want to split up the entire pie. You don't want to take all of the authorized shares and issue all of the authorized shares. You don't want to split up the entire pie into thirds, because that means the entire pie is spoken for. Okay, here there's nothing left for investors. So it wouldn't even make sense if you did this. It wouldn't even be making sense to talk to investors at this point, because let's say you talk to an investor and they're interested in what you're doing, and they're like, yeah, and they've committed a certain amount and it's pending due diligence. So what'll happen usually is that you'll make some sort of informal deal, and then an investor gets to conduct due diligence. These are all investors, by the way, whether you're talking about friends and family, you're talking about angels, you're talking about independent investors, you're talking about VC. They all have a right to engage in due diligence. Your friends and family usually won't care, but they have a right to do it before they invest. You have a data room. That's not in this video. I can go over that later. But your data room basically has all your financials. And before you have people investigate your data room and conduct due diligence, but after you've spoken to them, you've shown them some basic stuff, they've committed, that point you have them sign an NDA. You've got to. You can't show your financials and all that other stuff to anybody without an NDA. So don't have them sign an NDA like before you show them your pitch deck. That doesn't make any sense. I'll go over that when I start talking about the pitch deck, but that's a rookie mistake that founders make all the time. You're not going to show proprietary stuff. You might think things are really super proprietary, but usually they're not when they're just in a pitch deck, and you shouldn't be sharing anything that's proprietary, truly proprietary in a pitch deck. Okay, so anyhow, if investors engage in due diligence and they see that there's nothing left for them, they're out of there. Now you can authorize more shares. So you can say, okay, um, investor person, I know we have 10 million shares right now and they're all issued. I get that. And I know there's nothing left for you, but you know what we'll do? We'll just authorize some more shares. Technically, that can be done, but you're going to lose that investor. They want to know that there are shares that are available for them right now. So, as I mentioned, this means that all the shares will have been issued. It's not a great situation. So let's see. They want to make sure there's stuff left for them. So when you are forming your company and authorizing shares, in that same initial document, you also issue shares. Even if you're a solo founder, you still are issuing shares to yourself. So whether you're a solo founder, whether you got co-founders, you are issuing shares to yourself and or your co-founders, okay? That all has to be explained in your initial filings. But make sure that you leave a chunk of the pie unissued but authorized. Okay. Um, Let's see. I mentioned about employees. If you have some extra pie in the kitchen, it means that you can allocate some of that toward employees. Now, let's say that you've messed up and I did this. I made this mistake. That's why I'm filming all these videos because I've made almost every mistake that I'm talking about because I did not have a guide or a mentor or a roadmap or anything like that. I just got bits and pieces as they came to me from my research and it was just absolutely terrible. So I messed up like this. So there's no judgment if you are in this particular situation. So let's say you've messed up all your paperwork and it gets drafted, it gets filed, and you and your co-founders have the entire pie. Now, I wasn't in that precise situation, but I left too small of a slice of unissued shares. So then that means that you, if you're the entire board, or your board, if you have a board, and not a board of advisors, a board of directors, okay? So it means that you have to vote to increase the overall number of shares. That means authorized shares. That means you have to authorize additional shares. So instead of so your initial filing will say 10 million, and then let's say that you and your two other co-founders that you each have 3.3 million because that was what you put in your initial paperwork. So your initial paperwork, you messed up and you said, okay, each one of us gets 3.3 million. I'm just rounding. You can't go back and file and say, okay, now we're just taking fewer shares. No, the way you fix that situation is you authorize more shares, as in you create a bigger pie. You don't then say, okay, each person gets smaller slices. Once you've determined what your slices look like, that's set in stone. The only way to create more available shares is to authorize more shares, right? Let's see. I wanted to make sure I have something for you. Okay. Let me show you. So let's say you have this situation where each one of you got 25% of the authorized shares. So there's a remaining 25%. So that would be like 2.5 million if we're talking about a 10 million share pie. If you have done that, and let's say you never ever issue shares out of the unissued portion, that remains unissued, then at that point, you and your co-founders, you own 100% of the company. It's not like you all collectively only own 75% of the company. That's not true. So what you say is that you own 25%, that's you personally, fully diluted. That means if this part were to be issued and you've got all the pieces of the pie accounted for, then you have 25%. I hope that makes sense. But again, don't sweat it. If you never ever issue any of these unissued shares, then you don't have to worry about it. You and or your co-founders, you own the entire company. All right, I hope this makes sense. Just know that if you do, and I had to do this, I had to authorize more shares. Like it was just so bad. But if you do authorize more shares, it's typical to increase it on the fives. So like 15 million, 20 million, 25 million, things like that. You don't want to get too ahead of yourself and make too big of a jump, but that's sort of kind of what's expected. Okay. All right. Um, to increase the total number of shares, once a company is mature, that is something that happens. That's not a surprising thing. But if you have to do this at the nascence of your company, the birth of your company, it just makes it look like you're a rookie and that you don't know what you're doing. And it doesn't instill confidence in investors. And again, I was in that position, so I'm not judging in any sort of way. But it's just not great. So if you have not made that mistake, don't make this mistake. So if you're already in this less than ideal position, it can simply be overcome by just explaining away rookie errors. Well, that's what happened when I was at the very beginning and rookie mistake, and I've learned my lesson, and I certainly won't do that for my next startup. Haha. Try to just admit it. Don't try to deny that that was stupid. But admit it quickly and move on so that they don't linger on that topic. And yeah, so I just a big reminder, even if you're a solo founder, be sure your initial paperwork reflects that you are not issuing yourself all of the shares. Okay. Should you issue equal shares among co-founders? Equity splits do not have to be equal. If one person is pulling the company uphill while another is only helping out on nights and weekends, then the numbers should reflect that. So if a co-founder, like I mentioned earlier, they are supposed to be full-time on this sucker. But let's say your co-founder is by full-time, they're working 40 hours a week on the startup. And let's say you're working like 80 hours a week on the startup. I certainly hope that's not you, but that does happen, and that was my case. So you need to have a frank conversation with your co-founder and say, hey, it looks like I'm putting in about double, and you just need to have a very direct conversation about what that looks like in terms of how the pie is divided. Okay. So you don't have to have an equal split if there's not equal work being put in. Some accelerators like Y Combinator, you'll see this all over YouTube. Oh my God. There's so many videos that they put out on this. They love to see even splits among all the co-founders. And that's because they say it signals that founders aren't cheap or greedy. This is the message that they put out. Definitely take that with a grain of salt, because if you have an equal split, some investors, and I'm not trying to say that Y Combinator does this, but what I am saying is that it really can put you in a weakened position, and you super need to understand this. So if you all have an equal split, then some investors can come in, and if they invest a decent amount of money, they will want a board seat. If they're able to sort of woo one of your co-founders to vote their way, and if that means that they would have the majority vote together, then you could be gone like that. It absolutely can happen. You can get kicked right out of your own company. So you need to be really super careful about that. So let's say if you have, like, let's see, do I have a situation? I used to have a little situation like this that I could show. Oh, well, that's okay. But I think you understand what I'm trying to say. Um, all right, so let's say in another scenario, some investors will pressure you into additional shares. So they'll try to say, hey, you need to either authorize more shares, so it creates a bigger pie, it dilutes you, it means that you have a smaller percentage of that pie fully diluted. Or they'll say there should be more available, more shares available for the equity incentive plan. And that means that those unissued shares that you have sort of, I mean, they're not issued to specific people, but they are earmarked for an incentive plan for future employees, current or future employees. They'll say you have only 1 million allocated for the EIP. You need to increase that to 2 million. Well, maybe these investors care about the employees. I think that's not necessarily likely. I think it's likely that they want to dilute you. And they the more they dilute you, the more chance they have at having more power. And a lot of investors are looking at ways to get rid of the CEO. This is this is just such a common situation. So they'll figure out what they need to do in order to make sure that you don't have 51% of the company. So you need to protect against if you and your co-founders truly are equal and you're really super tight and you have a lot of trust and experience with one another, fine, go ahead and have equal shares. And it just means that none of you will have 51% of the company. But if you are doing more of the work and you want to protect your 51% and make sure that you always have 51%, then your initial documents that you file with the state should give you more than 51%. Because in all likelihood, if you take enough investors on in the future, and if you end up authorizing more shares, you're going to be diluted and you need to account for that. Give yourself a buffer. You could authorize, pardon me, you could issue yourself, the board, if you have a board, they'd have to agree, 65% of the authorized shares. And that means that in the future, when you get diluted, it's a lot harder to get a founder who has 65% fully diluted. It's a lot harder to get them below that 51%. So that might mean that some investors walk away because they see that they don't have that option to dilute you below the 51%. But if that's the case, that's probably the wrong investor for you. Probably a giant red flag, and you should be, walking away from that investor anyway. That's okay. Talk with your attorney about these concerns at the outset. Be sure that you say that you really, really want to protect yourself. The attorney can't guarantee that this is going to happen under any circumstance. The only way to guarantee this is if you issue yourself 100% of the authorized shares and never, ever, ever take on any investment by anyone ever. But then, like, why are you here in this course? Okay. It's fine if you want to do that. There's nothing wrong. There's no judgment at all. But it can be difficult and slow to grow that way as founder. But some founders have been very, very successful. The founder of Equinox, I just met her 2 days ago, and she is absolutely lovely. And I think she exited for $500 million. I think that company is worth 7 point something billion dollars now. And when she exited, she owned 100% of the company. It doesn't mean that she issued herself 100% of the authorized shares, but it means that at the very minimum, she did not issue any shares to anyone beyond herself. Okay, so that's the difference between authorized shares, the whole pie, issued shares, what you make available to anybody, including yourself, outstanding shares, those shares that are made available to people that they actually exercise. And I said that's outstanding shares. And then unissued shares. It's the amount of shares that have not yet been allocated to any particular people or, fund. To sum up equity, don't be greedy. if you have co-founders who are really doing equal work, then the issued equity should be equal or very close to it. Make sure you leave some unissued shares. However, you are not required to have equal shares at all. Yes, a co-founder should be full-time, but there are other factors to assess when it comes to the the amount of shares issued to co-founders. And then I already mentioned you could be working double time. You need to have really, really frank conversations. If you are founding a company, it's not a time to be shy about numbers. You need to be able to have very direct conversations and you need to be able to do what's best for the business. And that might mean being shrewd at some point. You really have to do what's best for the business overall. As mentioned above, be sure there are plenty of unissued shares for an EIP and potential investors in the future. If you're in this scenario, be sure that the number of shares that gets issued to you protects your future self from going below 51%. And what I mean is if you are in this situation where you are putting in the majority of the work, especially the overwhelming majority of the work, just protect yourself. If you want to go it alone, you still don't want to issue yourself all of the authorized shares. And it's not necessary anyway, because even if you issue yourself, let's say 65% of the authorized shares, if you never, ever, ever issue any more shares, it doesn't matter. You own 100% of the company. And so now we're going to talk about vesting, and I'm going to get back to my original recording. Now let's talk about vesting. Again, this would be a great time for you to stretch, take a break, get some food, get some water, do what you need to do. But all right, let's get into it. Vesting is a process by which someone earns ownership of their equity over time rather than receiving it all up front. It's important because it ensures that founders and employees earn their equity by staying and contributing, which it protects the company if someone leaves early. So, for example, when you are setting up your company, issuing shares to you and your co-founders, even if it's just to yourself, even if you're a solo founder, you don't want to have all your shares vested immediately, or basically, if you don't have a vesting schedule, then they vest immediately. You need to show that there's a vesting schedule, even if it's just for you. This is because investors want to know that if they come and they invest some big amount in your company, that you're not going to turn around and bail the next day. And the way they know that that's unlikely to happen is if there is vesting, if your shares vest according to a schedule. So it's not just your co-founders who need to have a vesting schedule. You also need to have a vesting schedule, whether you have co-founders or not. So your shares should vest over time with a cliff. A vesting cliff is the initial period during which there's no equities earned. So basically, you're working, 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 working. None of your shares have actually vested yet. Um, and you know they're going to at some point in the future. Um, After a certain period of time passes, then once that time period is officially passed, then you have a certain lump sum of your shares that vests all at once. Okay, that's usually not all of your equity. Usually it's 25% or something. That 25% it will vest all at once, and that ensures that only committed contributors they start earning ownership. Okay. A 2-year cliff, that's common. So it means no equity vests until you've proven that you can stick around for 2 years. And this has really saved me when I had my really crappy first CTO. He was just absolutely a freaking nightmare. There was a 2-year cliff. I'm like, nobody earns jack all until they've been around for 2 years. And basically I made sure that there was a way that I would have a right to fire anybody for any reason. And he was super, super awful. So I fired him, and he doesn't have one stinking share of my company. And I'm so glad that that's the case. And that's the importance of having this 2-year cliff. All right. So this isn't just about paperwork. It ensures investors, you're not going to bail. It also protects you in case you have a crappy co-founder. I didn't put that in there, but it's really true. And then not only is there a cliff, but then you have a vesting period. A vesting period. Okay. So a 4-year vesting period with a 2-year cliff is super, 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 super common. So you gain no equity for the first 2 years of employment. And then after that 2-year cliff, you become 100% vested in a portion of your equity, often 25%. And the remaining equity vests over the subsequent 2 years. And that means basically the total of 4 years between when you very first started your venture and then the end of that 4 years. So you wait 2 years, you get nothing. And then over the next 2 years, you get 1/48th each month thereafter. So this is kind of what it looks like. There's this little graph here. It might be hard to see. Really, this little line should go all the way up to 25%. That's what happens in most cases. And then it vests over the 4-year vesting period. So I hope this makes sense. I hope the visual helps. These things can be complicated. I'm just trying to make it as simple as possible, but it's not always easy. How many co-founders should you have? I mentioned this at the very beginning of the video, but just in case you forgot, a team size of 2 or 3 people is like the sweet spot. So a total of 2 or 3 people. So one founder and 2 co-founders, that tends to be like the max. The super, super max is one founder plus 3 co-founders. Investors really don't like to see 4 total co-founders. They really don't like that. But yeah, that's kind of, if you want to know what the sweet spot is, that's what it is, 2 or 3. Paperwork. Okay. The founder and all co-founders must sign appropriate documents, including NDAs. Yes, you have to sign an NDA because these secrets belong to the company. Okay. IP transfer agreements. If you're working on IP, then that IP belongs to the company, doesn't belong to you personally. So if you decide you're going to up and quit, and if you have other people who are in this business potentially that will be running the business after you, then you don't get to take that IP and use it. It belongs to the company. Here are some co-founder red flags. There are lots of them. And just a note, friends usually make terrible co-founders unless they're literally the perfect fit. So there are some great examples throughout history of friends making amazing co-founders, and they launch a company like YouTube or Justin TV, and it just goes great. And there are plenty of examples of that not being a fantastic fit for the company, where friends become enemies. And, Facebook is probably the most famous example. Tinder is a good example. That was really terrible what the male co-founders did to the female co-founder on that one. So, anyway, my friend Naomi, my best friend Naomi, I love her very much, but she was not a good fit for a co-founder, and I never should have made that offer to her. And later, when I had to tell her that basically she doesn't fit the definition of the co-founder, so she couldn't use it on LinkedIn or resume or anything like that, uh, it was very hard, and it was a very hard conversation that I had to have with her. But as a founder, I had to protect the business. It's the most, important thing for my friends and family investors, that I protect the business and do what's best for the business. And so I had to make that call, and it was a very difficult conversation to have. So I never should have made her a co-founder to begin with. Just keep that in mind. Charlatans are absolutely everywhere you look. So let's say you've already started your company and now you have to go find yourself a co-founder. So this is very typical when you have a non-technical co-founder and you're building a tech product and your expertise lies in other areas, but you're not a technical person. If you need to find yourself a technical co-founder, which you may very well not need, then just understand People are con artists everywhere, and I swear my first CTO was absolutely terrible, and he was like a criminal. I found out after I fired him that first of all, he hadn't done anything. He had done absolutely like almost next to nothing. And it was 6 months in. And then after I fired him, I found out a couple days later that he had sold our equipment. We didn't have a ton of equipment. We had a really fancy laptop and a couple of really fancy cell phones and stuff for him to allegedly program on. And I found out that he had sold those to some dude named Miguel. And and my CTO's name was not Miguel. So he was an outright criminal. And what am I going to do? I could go after him, but do I really want that press before we've even launched? Do I really want to involve myself there? No, is the answer. So that was just super horrible. And I also paid him money. Not only did I agree for him to have equity, but he always had this sad story about like, oh, I need money now because of this. And if I only had this amount of money, then I could really focus on building. There was always this like ridiculous story. And founders, if that happens to you, do yourself a favor, cut and run. Cut and run. There's always going to be a sad story. They're never going to have their shit together. So, and what sucks is that I actually ran a background check at the beginning before I brought this guy on. He had bad credit, but he had a really great story to explain why he had bad credit. And I believed him. And you should run a background check. And if someone has bad credit, very much consider not having them be a co-founder. Okay. So because I fell for that, and he had mentioned a couple times, well, I deserve a big salary, $250,000 salary because it's a CTO title. And he didn't get it. He didn't get that real co-founders do not get paid until there's revenue, and even then, pay should be very, very modest. So I've mentioned this before, but if you dip into investor money for your paycheck without an explicit agreement before they have invested, then that is called self-dealing. It's illegal. Don't be dumb. It can land you in prison. Solo founder plus an advisory board. I've seen this a lot, solo founders, and they'll say they have a team because they have an advisory board. Is it good for you to have an advisory board? Yes. But unless you alone are skilled at doing all of the things that need to be done, this does not make a team, as far as most investors are concerned. You need to bring on somebody, whether it's a co-founder or whether it's a key dedicated team member that isn't just an advisor. Okay. And if you don't want to bring on a co-founder, that's fine, but that needs to be like a tech lead, a sales lead, a marketing lead, someone who's an employee, somebody who can help for real, as in like in the trenches rather than simply advise. So the team members don't have to be full time, they just need to be doers. The team members do not have to get a salary. They can get equity only if they want to roll that way. They just need to be doers. Most of the doers are going to want a salary. They're going to want that. And so if they want a salary, then it might be very difficult if you can't afford that. But please, please, please get some doers on your team, people who go beyond the advisory role. All right, solo founder plus employees and or vendors. If you do decide to go solo, own it. There's no need to apologize for that. Hire what you need with equity, cash, a mix of both. Some investors are going to pass on you because they're going to say, "Oh, you're a solo founder. You should have a co-founder." And like I said, there every investor has a free and different opinion about this. So just pass on those investors. The right ones aren't going to care. Um, Paying yourself from revenue is usually fine as long as you're transparent and modest about it. I still personally think it's a good idea to be transparent about this at the outset and to ask for permission first. I'm really super conservative about this stuff. I want to be very, I don't know. I'm very careful, very, very careful about this stuff. Paying yourself from investor money is not allowed. I mentioned this before, unless you were given explicit permission by all investors prior to them putting in that money, then if you pay yourself from that investment, then it's self-dealing, it's illegal, you go to prison. Just be careful. It has happened. Some investors don't want you to get paid at all, like not even from revenue. And then they also don't want you to have a day job. And I think that's so freaking stupid. The most reasonable investors I've ever met totally understand that you need to have a day job or a side hustle or something. They are usually really, really gracious about it and fully understand. And some are even encouraging about that. They're like, yeah, while you're getting your startup off the ground, absolutely have another job, make ends meet. Do you need do what you need to do? You have to live. Um, so if you're running into investors who push you to quit your day job immediately and assuming that you need that day job to make ends meet, then that's a sign that that's the wrong investor. So ignore that and go find another investor. Not all money is good money, people. Not all money is good money because if you quit your day job, so you don't have that money, and then you can't pay yourself from investor money, and you don't have revenue yet, how the hell are you going to like make things work for your life? That means that investor is not being reasonable. If an investor expects you not to be able to make your own life happen, that's the wrong mindset. You don't want somebody, that's somebody who's like absolutely freaking greedy as all hell. You don't want them. Not all money is good money. It just isn't. Um, Also ignore the bravado from other founders. So I wrote a post about this. Founders will definitely have their own opinion and they'll say, oh, here's why you should quit your day job or whatever. F those people. They don't know what they're talking about. Only you know your own life and what's good for you. So I left a little link here to the post that I created about this. If you want to know when the ideal time is to quit your day job, then I outline it here in this post. And of course, if you want me to expand on that, I'm happy to do that. Just make sure that you post in the community or something like that. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you some cautionary tales. This is, I'm going to run through like all of my mistakes that I made at this phase, at the co-founder slash, equity employee phase, because I really don't want you to make the same mistakes. So this is going to be the last part of the video, but this also will be just a little tiny bit lengthy. Again, take a break if you want to. Oh, but I'm laying it all out so that you know the things to avoid. I already talked about my best friend Naomi and how I brought her on as a co-founder, and then I had to unwind that later when it was clear that not she was not able to spend the amount of time needed. She also really needed a lot of hand holding. She needed like constant reminders that, people are human, but that shouldn't be happening with a co-founder. Also, I made her a C-suite person. So I should put C-suite mistake. Um, I made her a CPO. She does not have the mentality for that. And maybe eventually she will, but she does not have my same level of experience. And I just kind of thought that since we're the same age and we grew up together, that she did, but she didn't. And she doesn't really know how to take that level of initiative yet. Maybe in the future she will. I also put her on the board. I was like, oh, we'll have this board of directors and she'll be on the board. So I had to unwind the co-founder situation. Then I had to unwind the CPO situation. Then I had to unwind the board of directors situation. Oh my goodness gracious. And this is after she put in $10,000 of investment at this phase when she was a co-founder because I told her, oh, well, if you're a co-founder, you should put in like X amount of money because investors are going to want to know whether the founder and co-founders have put in money. And I've put in this amount of money, and you should put in this amount of money. And she's like, okay, so she had already put in that amount of money. Oh my God, what an absolute freaking nightmare. And I'm sure if she didn't know me well, she'd probably think that I was being some sort of like terrible jerk who's just trying to get money from her. And that's just not true. I mean, I'd be happy to pay her back. She never asked me to, though. And she gets shares as an investor in the company. That's what she does. I mean, what she has. She has that kind of shares. But that was terrible. Yikes. Okay, her shares were skewed. I initially put her at like this huge amount of shares because I thought she was going to be a coworker, a co-founder. Um, so I had to unwind the number of shares that she got. This had already been filed with state too. I had to like refile. Um, so the tough call about the co-founder situation, that just means that I actually had to literally make a phone call about it. And I could tell she was about ready to cry when I told her she couldn't be a co-founder because she basically didn't fit the bill. And that I fell on my sword. What I said is, hey, I've done a lot of stuff, but I've never founded a tech startup before in my life. And I'm trying and I'm learning on the fly. And I just was ignorant. I didn't know. And I'm really, really sorry. And I gave her her space. And a couple days later, I checked in on her. I'm like, I'm not trying to ignore you. I'm trying to give you your space. And then everything's fine now. But that was really difficult. And if she wasn't so understanding and didn't know me so well, and I think that if I wasn't willing to admit that I was being a big idiot and that I was very, very sorry, I think it could have really gone sideways and south in a big way. And I'm very lucky. I had to make a similar phone call about the board of directors situation. It's really bad. Now she's like an advisor. She's technically an advisor. She's getting way more shares than an advisor would typically get. And I'm just gonna have to tap dance around that when it comes to future investors. I just am. And hopefully it won't be that bad, but I'm not willing. I've cut her shares as much as I'm going to cut her shares at this point. I'm not going to cut it any lower. And I will ask her to do some stuff for the business. She does HR. I'm asking her to write my entire employee handbook. And, I'm going to have her do stuff to earn those shares over time. And that's okay. Then was my brother. My brother is a big nerd. I wanted him on board at the very beginning, not because he was my brother, but because he was the best. And I mean, what my brother, he was doing tech nerd stuff at the dawn of the internet. He was this kid who was constantly getting into trouble. And there's an old ass movie called Hackers. That was like him. He was just a little bit younger. And I swear I was scared to death that he was going to be arrested by the FBI for hacking into the Pentagon or some shit because he was like always doing crazy stuff like that. Because back in the day, when things were just really emerging with the internet, it was a notch on your belt. It was just bragging rights. And these kids were doing crazy stuff like that. And he was very, very good. So I wanted him to be my technical co-founder because I know he knows his stuff and he's, built all kinds of things. He has his own AI company and whatever. Um, but I couldn't get him. By the way, he won second place in Google's third ever hackathon. So that was really cool. That was really, really cool. Um, all right, I already talked about my first CTO. Oh, by the way, so yeah, I wanted my brother to be my technical co-founder, but he said no because he was too busy with his own company. So I had to pass. So I had to try to find a technical co-founder. And I rushed it. I rushed it. I thought I need to hurry up and get myself a technical co-founder. And the reason why I thought that is because I took on a friends and family round. And as I hadn't even finished my round. I was like in the middle of my round. And I thought because I got my first check, oh, I bet I have to hurry up now and build, which means I have to hurry up and find a technical co-founder because I need to hurry up and start deploying these funds. Nothing could be further from the truth. And I went ahead and grabbed this guy. I was loosely connected with him on Facebook, which I don't even like check anymore. And he and I had one mutual connection. I used to wait tables with that dude. I went to that mutual connection before I interviewed this guy and I said, "Hey, do you know I'm calling him Spawn? Do you know Spawn? Like double Spawn. Do you know Spawn?" And he said, I don't, I worked with him at this one company. I don't really know him very well at all. And so he didn't vouch for him. And I still interviewed this guy. I ran a background check. His credit came back bad. I listened to his sob story. And then he said he needed X amount of dollars at the outset because it would really help him out and he'd be able to get focused and pay his rent and blah, blah, blah. And I felt like I was ridiculous. I can't believe I listened to this guy. And I thought it was serendipitous because he was becoming available just as I needed somebody. But It wasn't. I looked on his LinkedIn. He had 20 years of experience in full stack software engineering. That's according to him. He creates his own Facebook. I mean, not his own Facebook and his own LinkedIn. Um, asked my mutual friend. He needed money. He always needed money. He always pretended to care about finances, though. It was really weird. He said, "Oh, I'm concerned about this and that because it's expensive." So it was weird because when it came to using the right tools or um, writing our code in the right language, he was very concerned about expense. But when it came to himself and what he needed, it was always this like massive amount of money that he needed. So, um, anyhow, I already talked about him thinking that he deserves this like huge amount of money. And even though I had this conversation with him multiple times. I'm like, get over it. You're not going to get paid that. You don't like deserve it. You're a co-founder. You don't get that kind of money. And it was annoying to have to keep having this conversation. Also, he came very, very unprepared to every meeting. He was late for meetings. When you are dealing with a C-suite level person, they are not late for meetings. They're not unprepared. They have their shit together. It's not that they never make a mistake, but they very, very, very rarely make a mistake about that stuff. And they should be able to run their entire department without interference from you. Yeah, you can collaborate. I think that's a good idea, but they should like know what they're talking about and absolutely run the thing. And then they should be able to provide updates to you without you hunting them down for it. All right. So he was not qualified to be a CTO. He would not give me access to anything. And his explanation for this is like, in no company does the CEO have access to all of this tech stuff. And that might be true for companies that are established. For nascent companies, your brand spanking new, the founder has to have access to everything. You have to have access to everything. Don't give like these like randos your credit card or anything. Just be very, very careful. Make sure that any amount over a certain dollar amount of spend it has to go through you, that you have to approve it. Okay. Because when you are this new in the company, you probably don't have a CFO and you're it. The founder is it. Okay, we didn't even get along. We bickered about every little thing. It was just absolutely horrible. And then I remember him saying, "I don't think that I don't think it's that we don't get along. I think it's that you don't get along." He literally told me that. Like, okay. So I already told you about what he did with our equipment. I had to overnight kick him out of everything and try to scramble to recover the codes that I could, to the passwords, access to different tools and different websites, access to our app developer um, account. It's taken me a full year almost to unravel absolutely everything. It's been such a complete and total nightmare. So I was just glad that he doesn't have any shares and I was able to get rid of him. It was really, really, really terrible. And I needed to call on people to help me out because he wasn't going to give me access to everything. Um, and I needed help with that. I couldn't just do it on my own. So it was a total, total cluster, and make sure you have access to absolutely everything when you are founding a company. So then there's my boo, that's Michael. He became available just as I was firing Spawn. So his company, he works for startups and he's pretty high up and has run global tech support teams for startups for a long time. And his company, the CEO was absolutely really terrible and negotiated for himself $20 million out of the Series C round of fundraising. And then when they couldn't fund their Series D round, basically the the founder told everyone that they were being acquired, which was a lie. They were going bankrupt. Um, and then everyone got laid off and no severance for anybody, even though the CEO had negotiated $20 million for himself in the round beforehand. It was completely horrifying and an example of the kind of CEO that you never ever want to be. So I grabbed Michael and he is super competent and then he introduced me to a guy, I'm going to call him Saddam, because this is like my second try at a CTO. This guy knew Michael for 15 years. He was so I thought he was like really vetted, right? He knows my guy for like 15 years. They used to work together. He helped a big software company IPO. There was a red flag during his second interview because I had brought Naomi on to help me interview with this guy, and I was running through the deck to show him the vision for the company, and he said, well, before we talk about the product, I want to talk about like, like you all and like the company and like, getting to know you two. And I don't think there's anything wrong with getting to know the people, but the fact that he cut me off when I'm the fucking founder and CEO, um, to do what he wanted to do, it was like, so it was really disrespectful. And also, it ended up biting me in the ass because later on, the thing that he, in fact, had a problem with was our plan for the company. And that's exactly why I wanted him to be on board with the plan of the company. So I should have stood my ground there at the interview, and I should have noticed that that was a red flag and it probably wouldn't have been a good fit. But I didn't. He was very antiquated in his approach to anything tech. He was very negative, always talking about how things can't work. And I think that that's not the right attitude to have. When you're building tech, you're always going to come up against roadblocks every single time, and you just need to find creative ways around those roadblocks. Yeah, I want solution talk. I don't want just negative thinking. That's not helpful. So he wanted me to pivot pre-launch, which made absolutely no sense. We had a wait list of over 900 people at that point, and now we have like over 1,000 people. And he wanted us to pivot when we had people on our wait list, a lot of people on our wait list for what it is that we're building. And so I said no. And then he wouldn't let it go. And I realized finally one day I said, this is clear this is not going to work because you keep wanting me to pivot. I'm not going to do it. If I didn't have any evidence and if people did not want to even be on a wait list, if they were not interested in what we were building, okay, then sure, maybe. Then pre-launch you go ahead and pivot. But we already had evidence of our product market fit, like I showed you all from the last few videos. So I kept saying no, and finally he wouldn't let it go. And I said, it's clear this is not going to work out. And he said, great, I want to compete. So um, in California, non-compete clauses are not upheld. I know that because I'm an attorney in California. I do own my IP though. He doesn't have rights to the IP because I had him sign an IP transfer agreement. Everybody who comes into your company, you need to have them, every single person. They need to sign an NDA. They need to sign a non-compete. They need to sign, depending on whether they're, an employee or independent contractor or a freelancer or something like that. They need to sign the proper document that characterizes the nature of their relationship with the company. And there are probably others that I'm missing, but for sure, for sure, for sure, an IP transfer agreement. So anyway, he held my MVP for ransom. I had to agree to really super egregious terms, and I basically just wanted an MVP out. And he said the only way I'll stay to finish your MVP is if you agree to X, Y, and Z. And they were really horrible terms. He didn't help my tech advisor, who ended up taking over as a tech lead. She was asking him for information. He wouldn't give her the information she needed to access all kinds of stuff that she needed to help out. He ended up breaching our contract. He used some things that I'm paying for twerk, and he used them for his own competing business, which was not allowed. It's like totally crazy. So he did give me access to Spawn's Apple developer account, though, so that's at least something. He did answer questions after he left. Of course, once I told him that he had breached our contract by using the stuff that I'm paying for his own competing company, and he wasn't allowed to do that, and that violated our agreement, he stopped talking to me. He also had mentioned, oh, maybe I can be, one of your advisors. Hell, I don't ever want to see or speak to you again, buddy. Like, never. I don't think he realized how bad he was. He wasn't as bad as Spawn because it wasn't an outright criminal, but he was really, really, really bad and super negative. It was just awful. So at that point, two CTOs down, I was not in a hurry to find a new CTO, let alone a technical co-founder. I was just over it. Anna, she's my tech advisor. She ended up becoming my tech lead, and she and her team came in to help in with certain aspects of the tech while I was trying to find my next tech leader. So Matt, my brother, again, finally, he became available because he hired somebody for his own business to reduce his own workload. So I I grabbed him and I was like, dude, what do I have to do to bring you on board? And he finally agreed to come on board. What I like is that not only is he capable, but he's passionate about solving the problem that we're solving at work. And that is really important. I had to really think about whether to bring him on as a co-founder or as a CTO. I asked him whether he had a preference. He said, and this couldn't have been a better answer. He said, I want to do what's best for the company. So bring me on for whatever is best for the company. And it's best for the company that he comes on as a CTO, not a technical co-founder. This allows me to apply to some accelerators. They the accelerators that would require me to be on site for weeks on end. My brother is a husband with horses and he can't just up and leave for 8 weeks. So it makes sense to bring him on as a CTO and not a technical co-founder. Now, luckily, he's able to be brought on for equity for now, but I do plan on he will be getting paid as soon as we get funded and or as soon as we have revenue enough to pay him. So, and nobody should blink because he's not a co-founder, he's CTO. So, all right, my biggest lessons. Don't bring on friends and or family as co-founders simply because they've kind of done something that could be remotely useful. Don't do that. You bring them on if and only if they are the best person for the job. That's why I love the fact that Matt's on board because I know that he's really, really, really super good. And if you don't know anyone in your circle whom you've known for a long time and that you've trusted for a long time, a person that you've been through thick and thin with already at some point in your life, then your best choice is probably to be a solo founder. It is better for you to be a solo founder than for you to grab all of these people that try to get a co-founder after the fact where you're just meeting them on like Y Combinator's website or some like ridiculousness and you're just hoping that they're not going to scam you. There are so many scam artists out there, and you just want to be very, very careful. So I would rather see somebody be a solo founder, even if that means that they're going to be turned down by some investors. Be a solo founder, own it. And if you can hire on some of these aspects, great. And you can do that if you raise a friends and family round, which I'm going to be talking to you about. I'm going to show you how to do that in probably the next video or two. So stay tuned for that. And you take some of that money, put it aside, so that way you can hire out good agencies. We'll also go out, over what makes like a good manufacturer, what makes a good tech agency to build your tech if you're a if you're a technical founder, tech founder, I should say. So that way you're not just throwing your money in the garbage. Another option is to try to find somebody who is both best at what you need and will do that job for equity. It's really super difficult to find that kind of person if you haven't already known them throughout your life. So, on top of all that, it has to be somebody who's not going to rip you off or screw you over. And there are just so many stories of that. So just be careful. I have a friend who got really lucky and met it was like a person in an agency down in South America. She's had really, really good luck with that. So check to see if you know some founders who have had luck and talk to them about their experience. I did have a founder tell me that I should go ahead and hire one guy after Saddam and I paid him a down payment of several $1,000s. It was half of what our contract was for. Our contract was really spelled out about what he would do. And I gave him 2 weeks to do this one little thing, which was to go into our environment and give me a high level um, analysis of what was going on. And he didn't even do that. 2 weeks, he did absolutely nothing. He did the one thing that he wanted to do, which was totally not relevant. It was so antiquated. And I'm like, I can't believe I'm going down this road again. So I fired him. And I said, I want a refund. He agreed in writing to give me a refund. He hasn't given me a refund yet. Um, so just be careful. Just be very, very careful. And I vetted that person. I had vetted them with him with another female founder, and she was technical. And she's like, "Oh yeah, this guy's great with AI." He didn't know what the hell he was doing at all. It's hard. It's hard out there, y'all. The last option is for you to learn how to do everything yourself. If you don't already know how to do all the things. This route is often very, very, very time consuming and is exhausting, even more exhausting than just being a regular founder to begin with. Being a founder is so, so time consuming and exhausting. Your blood, sweat, and tears. It's just, it can be awful. You really need to make sure that you even want to go down this route before you do it because it's just, it's bad. All right. So anyway, just think about it. Don't bring on a co-founder just because Y Combinator or any single entity or investor wants to see one. Um, they will differ, and you can't make a decision for your company just because one person feels one way and then turn around and shift your entire organization chart just because another investor thinks another thing. You just can't, you can't do that. You need to have stability. So make your decision and then lean into it. Even if you bring people on who are not co-founders, don't just give away C-suite titles. And so this is my summary. So that's why it's repetitive. I'm just summarizing like the most important takeaway lessons. So don't give away C-suite titles. They have to actually be qualified to be a C-suite person. You can always advance someone's title, but demotion is a morale killer, and you might as well just part ways. Any high-level titles, not co-founders, should be paid or get a significant amount of equity or a combo. And the bottom line is this: co-founders are either rocket fuel or a time bomb. So choose wisely, document everything. Don't rush. That is the most important thing. I thought I had to rush to hurry up and get my team going and let's go, let's go, let's go. And I picked the wrong people because I was rushing. It was just super, super awful. And if I had to do it over again, I would have done things so, so differently and I would not have rushed the process. Don't let anyone convince you that being a solo founder is some kind of scarlet letter. It's just another playbook. You can go either way, and there are pros and cons to bring on co-founders. There are pros and cons to being a solo founder. You have to ultimately do what's right for you and what's right for your business, and only you know what that is. So consider all these factors. Rewatch this video. I will go ahead and segment it out so that way you can find the relevant portions. And I really hope that this has helped you. I've poured out my heart and soul into this video, even though it's been extremely long. It's long for me too. You think it's long for you to listen to it. It's long for me to plan it and to do this, but I'm doing it for you and because I really care and I want you to refrain from making the same mistakes that I have made. So that is it. Feel free to leave me any comments or questions, and I will see you in the next one. Until then, ciao.